Hey guys, my name is Miss Winkley from Allentown Elementary. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to have some fun with fourth grade math today. Let's jump in. All right, guys, so our essential concept today is to express a fraction with denominators of 10 as an equivalent fraction with denominators of 100. And we're going to use this technique to add fractions with respective denominators in 10 or 100. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be finding equivalent fractions with denominators of 10 and 100. All right, so I want to look at this word right here. We're going to convert. We're going to be converting tenths and hundreds. So that word convert or converting means to change. We'll be changing tenths to hundreds and hundreds to tenths. Before we get started, I want you to think about, if you're watching it with someone, a mom or dad or brother or sister, I want you to tell them how you think tenths and hundreds are related. Well, tenths and hundreds are related because how many tenths make up 100? 10, very good. We know that it takes 10 tenths to make up a whole 100, right? And we know that 10 hundredths, 10 of those little bitty squares, make up 1/10. Very good. All right, so before we start finding equivalent fractions, let's talk about naming fractions first. I'm sure this is a review for you. So let's look over here at this base 10 block. We see that we have 4 columns shaded. All right, so since we have 4 columns shaded, there's 10 total columns, so we have 4 tenths or 40 hundredths. If you look at each individual unit or hundredth, there's 10, 20, 30, 40. So 40 hundredths. If we just had 4 columns without the units shaded, that would be 4 tenths because we know 10 hundredths make up a tenth, so 4 tenths or 40 hundredths. Let's look at this one. This one we have 7 tenths shaded. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tenths shaded. Do you know how many hundredths that would be? Well, let's think. We know how many hundredths make up 1/10. 10. So if we said, okay, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 hundredths is the same or equivalent to 7 tenths. All right. Let's look at this one. How many tenths do we have shaded over here? 1, 2, 3. We have 3 tenths shaded. All right, now let's look at our hundredths tile. We have 10, 20, 30 hundredths. But if you look at the pink amount shaded, we can see that 3 tenths is the same amount as 30 hundredths. We call those equivalent fractions because they're equal. All right, and we know when we're talking about tenths, we know that each tenth or each column equals 10 units or 10 hundredths. And we also know that 10 hundredths or 10 units equal 1/10. All right. So what we can do, let's say we don't have our place value tiles to look at, and we want to know an equivalent fraction to 3/10. We could multiply by 10 because we know, we multiply by 10 because we know that 10 hundredths make up a 10. So we can multiply 3 times 10 to get 30, 10 times 10 to get 100, and there we go. We found our equivalent fraction. So that's 2 ways you can find equivalent fractions. All right, so let's look at this one. We have our hundredths over here, and let's look. We have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 hundredths. How many tenths would that be? 6 tenths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Well, let's say we didn't have the place value tiles and we wanted to figure out 60, an equivalent fraction of tenths from 60 hundredths. Well, how many, if we have 10 hundredths, how many tenths is that? 1/10. Very good. So we could divide by 10. We could say 60 divided by 10 is 6, and 100 divided by 10 is 10. Let's keep going. Great job, guys. So let's look. We have 7/10 shaded over here. Well, how many hundredths do I need to shade? All right, I could shade 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70. Notice at my columns, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns. If I count my hundredths, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, I have 70 hundredths. So I know that 7/10 is equivalent to 70 hundredths. All right, let's look at this one. Over here, we have 40 hundredths shaded. Well, how many tenths would that be? Well, let's see. How many columns do we have shaded? We have 4 columns shaded. So we would shade 4 columns over here, 4 tenths. So I know that 40 hundredths is equivalent to how many tenths? 4 tenths. Very good. All right, let's look at this one. How many tenths do we see over there? How many columns do we see shaded? 6. We have 6 tenths. Well, let's change or convert those to hundredths. All right. Well, how many columns do I need to shade over here? 6 columns. So this would be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Oh, I got ahead of myself. We would only shade 6 columns, and how many hundredths would that be? 60 hundredths. Very good. All right, let's look at our 80 hundredths over there. Can you figure out how many tenths that would be? Well, how many columns do you see shaded? 8. Very good. So we would shade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I know that 80 tenths is equivalent to 80 hundredths. All right, so let's think about money. All right, we can use when we think about money, we can also use this for converting. All right. When we think about money, we can also use our knowledge about money to convert fractions as well. So think about, how much is a dime worth? Tell someone who you're watching this with. How much is a dime worth? 10 cents, right? Well, how many dimes, how many dimes are in a dollar? 10. Very good. So we know that a dime is worth 10 cents, and we know that there are 10 dimes in a dollar. So we could think of our tenths as dimes, right? Well, now let's think about pennies. How much is a penny worth? 1 cent, right? Well, how many pennies do you have to have $1? 100 pennies. So we could think about our dimes as being as our tenths and our pennies being hundredths. All right, so let's look at this one. We have 4 tenths. Now remember, I said we can multiply when we're changing 4 tenths to 100. When we're changing tenths to hundredths, we can multiply by 10. We may not always have those place value tiles to use, right? We could picture them in our head, but another way we could do it is multiplying by 10, because remember, we know that there are 10 hundredths in 1 10, right? So if we have 4 tenths, we can multiply by 10 to get our equivalent fraction of 40 hundredths. All right. And let's say we were going from hundredths to tenths. All right, remember, if you have 80 hundredths, how many tenths would that be? How many tenths would that be? Excuse me. Well, we could, since we know that 10 hundredths make up 1 tenth, we could divide by 10 to get our equivalent fraction. So think about it. Think about our money. You have 80 pennies. That's 80 cents, right? Well, how many dimes would equal that same amount? 8 dimes, 8 tenths. Very good. All right, so now that we've talked about converting our fractions, now we can add them. So when we're adding fractions with different denominators, we always have to convert them to have the same denominator first. All right, so if we have 23 hundredths and 4 tenths, we can't add 23 plus 4. We have to change our tenths or convert our tenths to hundredths. How many hundredths would be in 4 tenths? Do you remember? Well, let's see. Remember, we can multiply by 10. We could say 4 times 10 is what? 40. 10 times 10 is what? 100. So we could say, oh, that's 40 hundredths. Now we can add our fractions. Remember, we can't add our fractions if they have different denominators. We have to convert one of them so that they have the same denominator first. Now we can add 23 hundredths plus 40 hundredths. But remember, when we're adding, think about 23 hundredths. What is 23 hundredths? That's 23 units, right? Our denominator, 100, tells us that that's how many units there are. There are 100 units. So, in our numerator, tells us how many of those units we have. So when we're adding, we're not going to add our denominator because the number that it's out of does not change. We only add the numerator. So we're going to add 23 plus 30. And what does that equal, guys? 63 hundredths. Very good. All right. So we could also do it by using our place value tile. I have 3 tenths shaded in dark green. Well, what would be my equivalent fraction with a hundredths into 3 tenths? How many hundredths would that be? Well, let's see. 10, 20, 30 hundredths. So if I changed this, now remember, we can't add them until I change it. I could change this to 30 hundredths. Now I could add 30 plus 35 to give me 65. And remember, our denominators stay the same because look at my place value tile. How many total tiles are on there? 100, right? So that's not going to change. Our denominator will not change. All right. So let's look over here. What fraction do we have shaded? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many total are there? 10. So I have 4/10 shaded. All right. How many do I have shaded over here? Well, I have 10, 20, 30, 31. Count with me. 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. How many total units or parts are there? 100. So this fraction would be 36/100. But can I add them like that? Nope. What do I need to do? Do we remember that word? Very good. We have to convert 4/10 into hundreds. And we can do that by multiplying by 10. What's 4 times 10, guys? 40. What's 10 times 10? 100. So now I can take 40 hundredths. Can I add 40 hundredths to 36 hundredths? Absolutely, they have the same denominator, so I can add them. So I'm going to add 40 plus 36, and what's that going to give me? Do you know? 76/100. Very good. So now, when we're adding fractions with denominators of tenths and hundredths, we're converting our fractions and we're adding all together. All right. Can you name that fraction of the tile over here shaded? Well, let's count. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. I could count each individual unit, but how many units do I know that are in the whole column? 10. And I notice that only one's not shaded. So I know that that means there's 9 shaded. So I'll have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 59. What would my denominator be? 100. Very good. I have 59/100 because I have 100 total units. That's where I get my denominator from. And my numerator is how much is shaded, which is 59. Now, what would be my fraction for this shaded one? Well, how many columns do I have shaded? 3. How many total columns are there? 10. So I have 3/10 shaded. All right, can I go ahead and add? What do I need to do? I need to convert 3/10. Very good. And remember, I could come over here and I could think, I have 3/10. I can multiply by 10. 3 times 10 is 30. 10 times 10 is 100. So I could say, 59 hundredths plus 30 hundredths. And what would that equal, guys? 89 hundredths. Very good. So remember, when I'm talking about equivalent fractions, I know that 3/10 is equivalent to 30 hundredths because I know that 1/10 is the same as 10 hundredths. Let's keep practicing. All right, what's the shaded fraction over here? I have 10, 20, 20, count with me, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. So what would my fraction be, guys? 27 hundredths. Very good. So now let's look at my shaded portion over here. What would my fraction be? Well, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what would my denominator be? 5 tenths. All right. Now, can I add 27 hundredths and 5 tenths? Nope, not yet. I have to convert 5 tenths into hundredths, right? And I can come over here to the side and I can do that by multiplying by 10, because I know if I have 5 tenths, I have 10 hundredths in each of those, so I can multiply by 10 and get 50 and 100. So I would have 50 hundredths. All right, now can I add those fractions up? 27 hundredths plus 50 hundredths would be 77 hundredths. Very good, guys. All right, we'll get a little bit quicker with these, okay? So what's the shaded fraction? 1/10. What's the shaded fraction for this tile? 10, 20, 30, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45 hundredths. And remember, we can multiply our 1/10 by 10, because we have to convert that to have a denominator of 100, and that would give us 10 hundredths. So what's 10 hundredths plus 45 hundredths? 55 hundredths. Very good, guys. All right, so now let's say we don't have our place value tiles. Can we still add them up? Absolutely, but can we add them up like this? Nope, we have to multiply by 10. So I could take 6 tenths, multiply by 10, and what would that give me? 60 hundredths. So now, could I add 60 hundredths to 18 hundredths? Yep, that would give me 78 100ths. Very good. All right, we have 24 hundredths plus 5 tenths. What do I need to do? I need to convert 5 tenths. I can multiply by 10, and that would give me 50 hundredths. Now that I've converted my 5 tenths, I found an equivalent fraction to 5 tenths, that's 50 hundredths. I can add that to 24 hundredths, and that would give me 74 hundredths. All right, guys, we're going to skip a couple problems because we're almost out of time. Have an activity I want you to try today. So I want you to empty out those piggy banks or those change jars, and I want you to create different combinations of the money in decimal form. For example, if you have 36 pennies, all right, we would write that like 0.36 cents, right? Well, 0.36 is a decimal. So we could say, oh, that's 36. How many pennies are in a dollar? 100. So we can say 36 cents is the same as 36 hundredths. So I want you to convert your amounts into fractions of tenths and hundredths, and do that with a partner, and you can add your amounts together. All right, I hope you enjoy your activity and you have a great day. I look forward to seeing you all on Thursday. Thanks, guys.